In Mark Batterson's book, Win the Day, he tells the story of a friend that he had who suffered from horrible and intense migraine headaches. Some of you may be able to relate to that. His friend said he would have moments of relief, but they were few and far between. He'd seen specialists, he had sought treatment. Nothing ever really helped very much or for very long. The pain became so debilitating, he had to resign the church from which he was pastoring. And so Batterson asked him, said, how are you managing your emotions about all this in addition to the physical discomfort and pain that you are experiencing? His friend looked at him and said, well, I've learned how to kiss the wave. Beg pardon? Batterson looked at him and said, I'm sorry, you learned how to do what? He said, Charles Haddon Spurgeon used to have a saying. He said, I've learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages. There's a legend in Judaism about a man named Nashon. He's a real person. We know that because the Bible talks, he only gets one begat in the whole Bible, but we know he's there. It turns out that he's actually the great-great-grandfather of King David. So he's very limited mention in the Bible, but that's more than you and I combined have. And he disappears almost as soon as he debuts. And so it's really kind of an odd person. But in Judaistic tradition, he's actually credited of saving the nation of Israel with one act of courage. If you have a Bible, or if you want to look at the screen, I want to look at Exodus chapter 14. Here is what the situation is. We've got the Israelites who have just come out of Egypt. Behind them is Pharaoh's army, armed to the teeth, chariots, horses, spears, every weapon known to man at the time. In front of them is the uncrossable Red Sea. It is the classic no-win situation. We either die by drowning or we die in battle. Now put yourself in their sandals for a moment. You're standing there, you hear the waves crashing in front of you and the horses clopping behind you, getting closer and closer by the moment. This is a time to panic, right? Not exactly. See, not only when these things happen do people panic, but real leaders begin to lead. They begin to stand up and say, this is what we're going to do. And so Moses said to the people who were clamoring, we're going to die. Do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You only need be still. These Israelites are trapped between literally a rock and a hard place. Nobody knows what to do. There's no way out. And God tells Moses to tell the people, move forward into the water. Now, according to rabbinic tradition, this is where Nashon, who is the leader of the tribe of Judah, steps up and steps into the water. He wades into it just like Aquaman. Okay, maybe not like Aquaman, but that's the way I picture it. He gets into the Red Sea, according to tradition, to where the water is at his ankles. He keeps walking into the water until it's up to his knees. He walks into the water until it's up to his waist. He walks in the water until it's chest high. And just as he takes that last step for the water to come up to here, it parts. And God creates a sidewalk through the Red Sea. God made the sidewalk through the sea, but Nashon made the miracle possible. How? We always kind of talk about, when we talk about Peter and walking on the water when Jesus beckons him, we always say, well, Peter walked on the water, but you know what? Peter had to get out of the boat first. God made a way through the Red Sea, but somebody had to step out and wade into the water first. Too often, we want to see somebody else walk on the water and somebody else wade into the water before we're willing to take that step. But if you want God to do something supernatural, like let you walk on top or walk on through, you better be ready to take that first step. God is waiting for you to wade into the water. God will do the supernatural if you will do the natural. Waves of trouble and trial will come, and sometimes we have to take a calculated risk. Sometimes we have to make a defining decision. Or as they used to say in the old days, sometimes you just take a flying leap of faith. I have three thoughts that come from Batterson's book about this and about what Moses told the people. The first thing is you have to face your fear. That's where it starts. Moses said, don't be afraid. The first step is always the hardest step. You have to overcome the law of inertia by exercising initiative. Amen? You don't ever, what is the old expression? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. You overcome the law of inertia. You are never going to travel 1,000 miles sitting on the front pew of the church, sitting in your recliner. You have to take the first step before God will act on the second step. And that's what Nashon did. He waded into the water right up to his nostrils. He saw that Egyptian army coming, and I think he decided, you know what? God says we're going to get delivered. I'm going to go ahead and trust him, and I'm going to head into this water. Because I'm pretty sure deliverance isn't in that direction. It's moving forward. Moses says, fear not. And I could just hear most of the people, are you out of your mind, Moses? Now, according to psychologists, we are only born with two fears. The fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Every other fear we have is a learned fear. Which means if we can learn a fear, we can unlearn it. I believe that fact because 1 John 4:18 says, perfect love casts out all fear. Now, people always get this part messed up. They say, well, wait a minute, aren't we supposed to fear God? That's not the same kind of fear. That fear of God is to revere God, to respect God, to trust God. And if we fear God in that way, we need fear, nothing else. And let me push that analogy just a little bit. How do you develop an immunity to a disease? By avoiding it? By hiding in a sterile bubble? I was going to say by wearing a mask, but I won't say that. The reality of it is, in order to get immunity to a disease, you have to be exposed to it. That's how we all got over chicken pox and measles and flu. You get exposed to it, and your body builds up antibodies. The same is true about fear. The cure for the fear of failure is not success. The cure for the fear of failure is multiple failures that come in small enough doses, repeated often enough, so that you build up an immunity to it. Now understand, you don't have to identify with the type of fear you're dealing with, whether it's a fear of failure, a fear of rejection, a fear of intimacy, a fear of the future, fear of social situations, whatever it is. You don't run away from it, you identify it, and you don't avoid it. You expose yourself to it in small enough ways that eventually you begin to build up an immunity to it, and you're not afraid of it anymore. That's what Nashon did. Business experts tell us that 9 out of 10 times, failure is just mismanaged success, and success is just well-managed failure. Think about that. Success is just well-managed failure. For some of us, one of the greatest things that could happen is for the thing that we fear the most to happen to us so that we wouldn't fear it anymore. I used to hate riding on roller coasters. I don't like to ride them on now because they hurt. But I used to, when I was a kid, I hated roller coasters. I was scared to death of them. Until what? The first time I rode? Ooh, baby, put me up there. We are a community, not of fear, but of faith. We eat faith for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. What does that help us do? It helps us to dream big, pray hard, and think long. We go after God-sized goals. We elevate and activate each other's faith because that helps create a barrier to fear. One final thought about facing fear. All of us want a miracle. None of us wants to be in a situation that necessitates that miracle. But you can't have one without the other. You can't want miracles if you're not in situations that require miracles. If you can accomplish it naturally, you don't need the supernatural. If the Israelites could have gotten on a bridge that was already built to cross the Red Sea, they wouldn't have needed God to part it. Amen? Here's the good news. When you experience a setback, you don't have to take a step back because God is already preparing your comeback. God says to Moses in Exodus 14:4, he says, I have planned all of this in order to display my glory. God's going to put his glory on display. So face your fear and then stand your ground. The New Living Translation of that verse says, stand still, as in, be still and know that I am God. The NIV says, stand firm, as in, having done all to stand, stand firm. The Amplified Version says, take your stand. The Good News Translation says, stand your ground. But whatever you want to translate that as, when the Egyptian army is bearing down on you, the last thing you want to do is stand there. Fear of flight, right? There's a scene in the movie Ford versus Ferrari where Carroll Shelby, who is played by Matt Damon, talks about his love of engines, and he says there's a point at 7,000 RPM where everything fades. The machine becomes weightless. It just disappears. All that's left is a body moving through space and time, 7,000 RPM. That's where it happens. That's where you meet it. And that's where you feel it. It'll creep up to you and it will ask you a question. It'll ask the only question that really matters, he says. Who are you? Now, I don't know what Moses thought when he got there, saw the army, saw the sea. His brain was probably flashing at 7,000 RPM. Where do we go? What do we do? And so he looks at God, and God says, what did I tell you? When Moses encountered God in the burning bush, he says to God, who are you? And God doesn't say, well, I am. First, what God says is, I will be with you. See, Moses asked the wrong question. Moses asked the question, who are you? God wanted him to ask, will you be with me? Because that's all we need to know. There's a great story about General Anthony McAuliffe at the Battle of the Bulge. His platoon was completely surrounded by the enemy. And he looked at his soldiers and he said, men, we have the greatest opportunity ever afforded an army. We can attack in any direction. Now that's flipping the script. That's kissing the wave. In crisis situations, we go back to ground zero. We go back to the foot of the cross. We go back to the empty tomb. We go back to the promises that God has answered and fulfilled in our life over and over and over again. We remember he who began a good work is going to carry it on to completion. We remember that he watches over his world to perform in it and to keep his word. We remember that he's working all things together for his good. We remember I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We sing songs like, "Great is thy faithfulness." Jesus loves me because the Bible tells me so. We go back to our daily spiritual disciplines because the only ceiling on our intimacy with God and the impact that we will have on the world is knowing that we are in that right relationship and that we can trust God for every step of the way. That's how I pray. I trust that's how you pray. I've always believed if you stay humble and hungry, that there's nothing God will not do for you. There's nothing God will not do in you. And there's everything that God can do through you. All we do is stand still and know that he is God. Thirdly, hold your peace. We do our social distance greeting. We do our greeting time. We're not socially distant anymore, but we do our greeting time. In Orthodox churches, that's known as passing the peace. It traces back to the words of Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount when he said, if you're offering a gift and realize that you're at odds with someone, no matter who is at fault, go and be reconciled. Go and make peace with them. So in traditional churches, in Orthodox churches, that going around every Sunday morning is so that those people who are gathered in that building can say to one another, I love you, and if I'm at fault for anything, please forgive me. I want to be at peace with you. I want you to be at peace with me. Because if we are at peace with each other, we can be at peace with God. Man, we could use that today. I had the privilege of riding back home from lunch with Michael Johnson Friday afternoon, and he and I, we've had this conversation before, but we talked about the lack of civility that seems to exist, not just in our world, but in the church. People who get bent out of shape over different political positions. People who get bent out of shape about problems of the world. And here's what I believe. I believe that the way you counteract those problems, the way that you solve those things of political polarization, is you interrupt the pattern. You don't feed into the dialogue. You love your enemies. You pray for those who persecute you. You pray for those who curse you and despitefully use you. You bless them. Those are acts of reconciliation of how we pass the peace and make peace with one another so that we can make peace with God. And when that happens, heaven invades earth. But I know it's hard to pass the peace if you don't know how to hold on to your peace. I understand and recognize a lot of people have lost their peace. Research tells us 1/3 of Americans struggle with either anxiety or depression. Their peace seems to have vanished. Where'd it go? How do you get it back? How do you hold on to your peace when you feel like your world is spinning off its axis? How do you hold on to your peace when the train is running off the tracks? See, we just don't talk about peace. We follow the Prince of Peace. And he says, trust me. Follow me. Walk with me. So we stay calm, we carry on, we hold on to our peace, for he is our peace. We are a people who are held by the one who can rebuke the wind and the waves. He can say to the storm, peace, be still, so that when others say terrible things and do horrible things and seem to go out of their way to make our lives miserable, we don't have to take offense. Do you know you have to take offense? Being offended requires you to initiate an action. I had disagreements this week with very dear friends. You know what happened at the end of it? We hugged each other and said, we love you. And I trust you. And I believe in you. We passed the peace. I talked last week about worrying about the past. We can't change things in the past. We can own that past, because if we don't own the past will own us. You ever hear the expression about taking up real estate in somebody else's mind? You know, sometimes we let the past take up a lot of real estate in our mind. And not just the good parts of the past, not just the nice, pleasant memories of Sunday school picnics when we were 5 years old. We remember people who said and did things to us that if we could do something about it today, we would. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it, and we can win the present. So that when we win the present, we take the past and we bury it 6 feet deep. And when the storms come and the waves come at us and threaten to capsize us and crash around us, we can kiss the wave, because all it does is throw us in the direction of the Rock of Ages. I'm not sure what step of faith you need to take. I do know this. The first step is the hardest step. As I said before, you have to overcome the law of inertia to get moving, and that requires exercising initiative. You overcome your fear by exercising your faith. So I'll tell you right now, if you need marriage counseling, you're going to have to wade into the water. If you're trying to get out of debt, you got to wade into the water. You want to lose weight? You got to drink more water. And you got to wade into the water. If you're training for a marathon, you got to wade into the water. If you're trying to resolve conflict, you've got to wade into the water. It really doesn't matter what the obstacle or challenge is. Getting started is hard. The first step is always the hardest step. But if you want God to do the supernatural, you must do the natural. If you want God to make a sidewalk through the sea, then you got to wade out into the water and kiss the waves goodbye. I'm always reminded, in fact, I debated on which way to go with this story this morning, because my other favorite story in the Old Testament is the story of Naaman. You know the story of Naaman? Naaman was a leper. And he went to Elisha. And Elisha said, go down to the stinky, dirty, muddy Jordan River and dip yourself 7 times, and when you come up, you'll be clean. You'll be healed. And Naaman said, wait a minute, I got really nice rivers back in my home country. Why don't I go there? There's clear. I can see stuff. And a prophet said, no, go down there. So Naaman does. Because the servant says, well, what if he had told you to do something else? Would you have done that? Well, yeah, well, then do that. Go to Jordan. Imagine what would have happened if Naaman had gone down 3 times, came up and said, still got leprosy, I'm done. Or on the 4th time, came up and said, no, didn't work. 5th time, no, didn't work. What if Nashon had gotten out and the water had got to his ankles and he thought, I'll try a little more. And he got to the knees, I'll try a little more. And he gets up to his waist, maybe I'll go just a little more. And he gets up, he says, no, this isn't going to work. I'm going to turn around, I'll quit. The problem with wading into the water, the problem with trusting God is we've got to trust all the way. We got to keep going out until God works. We have to keep saying, God, I'm going to keep going in this direction because you've told me this is the direction to go. You've led me down this path. You said this is where I will be. Come with me, and I'm going to go even if I don't understand it. I know you want me to be at peace with people. I know you want me to not be afraid. I know you want me to stand my ground. So I'm going to do that, and I'm not going to quit until you do what you've promised to do. We can't quit too soon. We cannot give up too easily. Because yesterday is history and tomorrow is a mystery. The storms will come. The troubles will come. The world will send them our way. Jesus told us that was going to happen. But he said, do not fear. I have overcome the world. So kiss the wave. It's throwing you in the direction of the Rock of Ages. And you can trust him. And he'll take care of you.